those kind of heritage designations.
Thank you. And moving on to QD12, outdoor advertisements, digital displays and hoardings, just a modification, a couple of modifications, 19 and 20, I believe.
Yeah, so modification 19, QD12, criterion F, there is an error there, and it did read tree protection orders. It should read tree preservation orders, which is something I regularly get wrong, so apologies for that. And then paragraph 5.94, there is the introduction of punctuation, i.e. a full stop at the end of transport for London road network.
Thank you very much. Just on the same page, MO24, did we cover that one, Mr. Syme? I just want to check. That was relating to London squares, and information which I believe Mr. Hall may have sent in. MO24, did we cover that one? Is that in matter 11? I think I'm crossing my matters now.
I think it is matter 11, yes, heritage.
Okay. I think we've reached the end of matter 10. Looking around the table, has everybody had sufficient opportunity to say what they came to say? Okay. Thank you. So that's the end of matter 10, everyone. That's the end of high quality design, chapter 5 of the local plan. So thank you to everyone, and including those people that have now departed, for all the participation. So this session on matter 10 is complete. Does anybody need a short comfort break before we move on to matter 11? I think whilst we'll just take a 5-minute adjournment, it'll give an opportunity for people to move around if they wish. I understand the air conditioning is being worked on, so it will hopefully therefore resolve itself if people are uncomfortable. We'll just adjourn for a few moments. Thank you. Sorry, Mr. Hall. We ready to resume? We got everyone who we need. I mean, if there's anybody at the table who's not scheduled to speak on this matter, do feel free to move back into the audience. I don't know whether the seats may be more comfortable up there or it's the same, but please do feel free to move if you wish. So looking around the room, we haven't got any new participants. So normally we go through an opening for each matter, but I'm proposing we'll just move on to start the agenda. So turning to the agenda, we've got three policies in this heritage chapter. A number of representations that have been made. So in terms of policy HE1, I think the council have put forward a modification. You're suggesting to make it more sound. Obviously, you appreciate we're not in the business of making things more sound. We just need sound. So in your supporting text amendments, what do you have some text in mind? You're referring to paragraph 8, 6.8 and 6.10. Thank you.
Yes. The policy itself doesn't refer to archaeological assets, but it doesn't refer to any specific heritage assets at all. So it's got a sort of overview saying site, building or structure, but archaeology is mentioned in the first paragraph of the explanation. So we think it is clear that archaeology is included in this policy, but it isn't mentioned very often in the subsequent paragraphs. And we did identify 2 places where it could properly be included. So 6.8 refers to different types of investigations. And so we thought that including reference to archaeological investigations was appropriate there. And then in 6.10, similarly, it refers to building recording. And we thought that referring to archaeological investigation as well was relevant, so that we were being equally handed across the board.
Thank you. And in terms of criterion B in the policy, and there's a modification there. I'm wondering, we're talking about heritage assets. Is that in this? Is that a clear enough term for the plan users?
We felt that heritage asset is a very well used term, and it's in the glossary of NPPF and the glossary of the new local plan. So we didn't feel that it needed any further explanation. But if it did need greater clarity, then the definition could be included in the policy.
Yes, I'm thinking in terms of, if we're talking in general terms of heritage assets, that would you also incorporate non-designated heritage assets in there, because my concern is that towards the end we've got the reference to the public benefit test, and obviously that's designated heritage assets. So if you want to talk about heritage assets in the wider sense, the reference to the public benefits in criterion B would need to come out. Or if you want to keep that, be more specific in your reference to the designated heritage assets of B. I'll leave it to the council to just consider that for a moment, and then I'll come to your response.
Yes, I would suggest that perhaps it's criteria D that needs to be more specific in that case, and refer specifically to designated heritage assets.
So in terms of the criterion B and the end of that, so the final line of that sentence in B refers to public benefits. So if we're talking about D and that's relative to designated heritage assets, that works. But if we're in B, the heritage assets that we're talking about there, are they designated or not designated? Or if they're general, then we might be introducing a public benefits test in all heritage assets.
Yes, well, the reference to clearly and convincingly being clearly and convincingly justified does only relate to designated heritage assets. So it is not properly, it doesn't sit properly in B.
So I think the proposed modification is that we remove that sentence from part B, and it's more adequately addressed through part D, through the amendment that Joanna has said.
Thank you. So just in terms of MO21 and MO22. So MO21 is about a factual description, so deleting extension and museum extension. And MO22 is a typographical error, so I think that's fairly clear. So I'm going to move on from HE1, and I'm going to move on to HE2, please. So these are the designated heritage assets. And I'm looking at the agenda. So our question 11.7 relating to criterion B, and I think the council have got a modification put forward in relation to that. You put the microphone on.
The modification has been modified, and it's just in the ordering of the paragraphs. So we've added 2 paragraphs, which are B and C, and the original paragraph B has been moved to the end to become paragraph D.
Just looking to check that everybody's got that. Is that clear to everyone, that modification? So just ticking off my list, I think that comes up at MO 195, doesn't it? 195. Yes, thank you. So in terms of the London squares, the council's the council statement in 11.8.5 refers to a review of the designated London squares. Has that come into us as part of the evidence base?
No, that wasn't part of the evidence base. That was a process that officers took in checking whether all the London squares that were included in the schedules of the Act still existed, where they were, whether there'd been any reprovision of any. So it was a factual review.
Okay, does that exist in a form that we could just have into the examination library?
We do have a document, yes, that identifies them with some photos. Yeah.
If we could add that onto the action list, just to send that into the programme officer, please. So I think it follows on from what we were just talking about, London squares. I believe it was Mr. Hall, and information on Taymount Rise being absent, and you sent some information. So if we can just clear up that point, Mr. Hall.
It follows on from Joanna, really, in that what I did was I had a quick look at the original Act and tried to identify the London squares in the borough of Lewisham as it is today, which included the old Lewisham borough and the old Deptford borough. And so is Joanna saying that she's going to do a piece of work to see if there is if the current policies line up with the position as amended, because obviously things change over time. So that's the bit I've not had anything. I have to say, I apologise to the inquiry why it's here, because I haven't had any conversation whatsoever with the council since Regulation 18, or indeed before. That's why I'm here. So according to a little bit of research I did, is that Taymount Rise, the roundabout there, is actually counterintuitively is in fact a London square, and it doesn't appear on any of the lists. And so I would like the council to look into that and others that may have been omitted or changed.
Thank you, Mr. Hall. Could I just come back to Ms. Eccleston?
Yes, so we have already done that review. One of the things that happens over time is that places change their names, and that was the case with Taymount Rise. So it's listed in one of the schedules appended to the Act as Queen's Road. So it's Queen's Road Square. So it took us a bit of time to track that one down, and that was part of the work we were doing in identifying all of the London squares, because there'd been a few name changes. So we do have Taymount Rise on our review list, but I think there was an error in the list that was included in the London plan, and that omitted Taymount Rise and a couple of others. And I think that might have been because there's two schedules appended to the Act. There's well, there's three actually, but our London squares fall into two of those. And I think what happened was the last time this list got produced, it only included the ones in Schedule 1 and just omitted the ones in the other schedule. So that seems to me what the error was. But our piece of work identified all of them. We have a final list, and the modification has that final list.
Quick thing, really, it just in light of all those comments, is it possible to see this work? Because, as I say, I've had no communication at all. So that's all.
Thank you, Mr. Hall. I think the council have got a note of your point there. I think it might not be something we can resolve right here, right now. And I think that's a conversation outside of this session, if I can suggest that, to possibly just get to the bottom of it. And if it is something that needs to be included, then
Sorry, get to the bottom of what?
So just to be absolutely clear, so in terms of the London squares, what the council has done, it has done a thorough review of those London squares identified within the Act, and the local plan and the suggested modifications are identifying all London squares. I think the confusion seems to be that in the London plan, there are two within Lewisham which have been missed. And that is one of them that has been referred to. Now, clearly, for any future London plan review, we will be making sure that our GLA colleagues include that within that schedule. But, I want to just be absolutely clear that we've carried out the review. We have clarified each of the London squares, and the London squares will then be reflected in the local plan as the modifications suggest.
just in terms of the fact that they're listed in the Act, is there anything that prevents you from including it within the local plan, even though it's not in the London plan? Because if it exists in an Act, that already sits aside. I'm just trying to get this clear in my head.
Yeah, sorry, this is confusing. It's the new local plan has got a list in it of London squares, which isn't complete, and Taymount Rise was left out of it. So we have, and we're aware of that, and we're aware of all of the London squares in the borough, and we have a document which we will give you, which is our review of the London squares. But it's a modification to include a full list so that the new local plan can be updated.
I think thank you. Mr. Hall, I've got your point. Thank you. So just moving on in the agenda, please. So we're going to look at the next bullet point is the World Heritage Site Buffer Zone, and I believe the council had referred to conversations with the Greater London Authority in terms of a buffer zone to illustrate the buffer zone. I think in terms of anything that is outside of your plan area is typically not shown. If it's just for information, I suppose if it's in sort of a grayed out form beyond your plan boundary, just as context. But I'm conscious that anything on sort of policies map is about the council making sure that amendments are reflected on that policies map, but it's not a modification in our sense. Does the council want to explain anything further on that buffer zone illustration of the World Heritage Site? It's in relation to our question 11.9.
Yeah, so this was responding to the buffer zone of the World Heritage Site, and we're suggesting a modification to Part F, which just states that, or includes proposals that robustly demonstrate that. Apologies, that's the wrong one. Amendment to paragraph 6.17, modification 196, which essentially adds in a paragraph that says the remainder of the buffer zone lies outside of Lewisham's administrative boundary and is beyond the scope of the local plan. It is shown for information purposes. The idea here would be that we would show in figure 6.1 effectively a slightly greyed out version of the continuation of the buffer zone. Completely accept the point that in the policy map, it wouldn't apply, but in this diagram as a kind of diagrammatic representation, we feel that it would be appropriate.
I mean, this has come from the GLA, hasn't it? Or from, where's this representation come from? Yes, nodding ahead there. I mean, generally, I would tend to stick to the plan area in terms of, putting any kind of designations, etc., on the kind of policies map and associated diagrams. That would be my starting point. And we're just discussing there from a consistency point of view. If you do that there, are there other areas which you may need to look at? And it could get quite complicated if you extend the diagram beyond the plan area in this particular instance. Just sort of thinking through the potential implications and consistency issues. I'm happy to take views from the council on that.
Yes, it's a valid point. And what I was just planning to do was check whether or not any other strategic designations goes beyond the boundary and no. So I'm looking at figure 10.3, which is metropolitan open land, which again we've limited to within our administrative boundary. So I think we're happy to with the modification to paragraph 6.17 in the supporting text, not to amend the plan and just have the reference within the supporting text.
I think that might be a way forward. So it's still covered in the supporting text. Presumably that there would be a diagram elsewhere where that can be referenced.
Right, just moving on to a few other representations that of participants that are not at the table. Just to go through some of those, please. Barrett London had got some concerns about criterion H. And I'll just move on to Artworks Creekside. They were concerned about criterion F, and Lawrence Cohen et al. Were also concerned about criterion F. I wonder if I could turn to the council to for a response on each one in turn, please? If that's possible. Is that easy for you?
Yes,
you got
I can
those?
do that. I get
Thank you.
the documents in front of me. So Barrett's first. Paragraph H is referring to development proposals that would result in substantial harm to the significance of a listed building and its setting will be strongly resisted in line with the MPPF. And they have their representation says that this should have a caveat saying, unless where it's demonstrated that the harm is necessary to achieve substantial public benefits that outweigh the harm in line with the MPPF. I don't agree with that. I think the MPPF is very clear that substantial harm should be exceptional and wholly exceptional in the case of grade 2 listed buildings and wholly acceptable when it comes to grade 2 star and grade 1 listed buildings. So I think our use of language saying strongly resisted is absolutely in line with that. NPPF paragraph 200 says substantial harm should be very rare. So I think it's right that we set that out in those strong terms. There are MPPF does include a number of options. So it's got subparagraphs A, B, and C and D, which are ones that may lead to the council considering that substantial harm was acceptable. But I don't think that given MPPF paragraph 200 and its clear statement that substantial harm should be very rare, that we just treat demolition of listed buildings in the same way that we would other heritage assets, designated heritage assets.
Thank you. So just in terms of criterion H, does that need a reference to the public benefits, like in criterion ID? Because we are talking about listed buildings, or is it, or would the operation of the policy, would you use all of the criterion under listed buildings of H, I, and J together, so it doesn't need to repeat public benefits test twice?
Sorry, can I just clarify that? Are you saying that would we consider both paragraphs H and I for a proposal to demolish a listed building?
Just turn it off. Thank you. Yeah, just in terms of listed building proposals affecting listed buildings more widely, would you be using H, I, and J collectively in a proposal? I'm just looking at criterion I, little d. Obviously, that makes reference to the public benefit test, doesn't it? But H sort of gives that overarching substantial harm to the significance. And obviously, that would be qualified if there is significant harm and the public benefits test. It's just a clarification from sort of more of an operational point of view of the policy.
I think I might have confused us. I think I referred to the subparagraphs in policy I earlier when I was talking to policy H, but I actually meant to refer to the sub-paragraphs in MPPF 201 when I was referring to substantial harm. Sorry, yeah, I've got too many documents in front of me. That may inform my answer to what you were just saying. But so our use of these policies there is overlap. I think I may not understand your question still, sorry.
Okay, just to try and clarify this one. So criterion H is all about the substantial harm to the significance of the listed building. I think I may have led you astray with ID because that's less than substantial harm. But my point being, should H have reference to that public benefits test to be consistent with the NPPF when we're talking about substantial harm?
I think this depends on whether we should be setting out our policies in the same way as they are set out in NPPF. And we haven't done that across the board. Some of our modifications have been to do that more, but I think there's a reluctance to completely replicate the wording of NPPF because it's unnecessary. So what we've done in paragraph H is to set out the weight of objection to substantial demolition, which is in line with NPPF, but it's not then going further and saying how we would deal with the application.
Yeah, it's just sort of thinking out loud again. I think there's a bit of a consistency issue, isn't there? Because in relation to H, which relates to substantial harm, the council hasn't referred to the public benefits test, which is slightly different to the public benefits test on less than substantial harm, but it just of course refers to the NPPF in relation to that test, doesn't it? It relies on the NPPF, whereas in criterion ID it repeats the public benefits test. So I think there's just a bit of consistency. There's a consistency issues as to whether you rely on the NPPF or you repeat the NPPF, and there's inconsistency in the policy from that point of view.
I think because we've put in line with the NPPF, we were considering that meant that, you know, we're determining or assessing substantial harm in line with NPPF, which then includes the tests to do with avoiding harm, balancing public benefits, clear and convincing justification. But it could be set out clearly by replicating the terminology that is under D as well, and then
I think just to be clear, I think we're agreeing, we're now agreeing with you that we will suggest a modification to part H of the plan, which clearly references the public benefit points and provides more consistency, not as well as with the NPPF, but with part I, criteria D.
Yeah, and I think just to be clear though, that the public benefit test is different. I don't need to tell you, is slightly different in terms of substantial harm compared to less than substantial harm. So just to be aware of that.
Yeah. We'll reflect that in the modification, yeah.
So is the modification to include that test rather than cross-reference, just to be clear? Is the modification to include the test rather than just cross-reference?
Yes.
So just moving on, we've got Artworks Creekside, and also Lawrence Cohen, who've made representations on this point and criterion F. So this is the demolition. This is the demolition point. Would the council like to make any response to those two representations, please?
Yes. So this is regarding the weight that's given to the loss of a building that makes a positive contribution in a conservation area. And refers to the case, the Bohm case in Camden. There's we've got a modification proposed, which is MO23, which is a response to that. But since this drafting, we have discussed this further and think that it is not helpful. The issue is about the use of terminology positive contribution, and that is something that is used in identifying the contribution that a building makes to the historic and architectural character and appearance of a conservation area. And that's, there's guidance in Historic England, guidance note, conservation area management, designation and appraisal, with 10 criteria for how you identify whether something makes a positive contribution. And it specifically relates to historic buildings. In MPPF, that phrase positive contribution is also used to refer to new buildings, but it refers to their contribution to local distinctiveness and character. So that isn't necessarily the historic and architectural character of a conservation area. So the modification we've proposed says proposals that robustly demonstrate, this is MO23, proposals that robustly demonstrate that new replacement buildings or structures make a greater positive contribution to the conservation area and outweigh the potential harm of demolition will be considered on their merits. I don't think this is helpful because there is this difference in definition effectively between MPPF talking about new development and how we use it to talk about buildings in a historic buildings in a conservation area. But it is right, of course, that in assessing the impact that demolition and redevelopment would have on a conservation area, we would consider both the significance and impact of loss of the positive contributor, but we would also consider the qualities, architectural and townscape, of the new building, and then come to a conclusion about the overall, whether it preserved or enhanced, because that is the requirement in legislation. My feeling is that if we should change this, we should simply refer to the MPPF tests, because they set out a clear step-by-step guidance of assessing harm versus public benefit. And I think it would be helpful to say that proposals involving the demolition of buildings or structures that make a positive contribution to the character and appearance of a conservation area would be would be assessed in line with the MPPF tests for impact on designated heritage assets, i.e. the conservation area, and non-designated heritage assets, i.e. the building that makes a positive contribution. And then it's clear the extent of the assessment that we'd be doing, not just the non-designated heritage asset, but the conservation area itself, and that we'd be referring to the MPPF tests, the full gamut of them.
Okay, thank you. So just on that criterion F, we're obviously in the designated heritage assets policy, and I think you just made reference to a non-designated you mentioned in there. So I'm just keen to make sure that we keep our designated is nicely clear and the non-designated and almost not cross-fertilize things between the two of them.
Yeah, we'll take that away and look at the wording there. I think the point being is that we are responding positively to some of the representations and feel that the use of the word resisted within the part F isn't particularly helpful, and actually that will be replaced with assessed in line with National Planning Policy Guidance Test for impact on designated heritage assets. I think we will we'll take a look at the remaining sentence there then of the modification relating to non-designated heritage assets. Yes,
thank you for that. Just to close out policy HE2. I've got a note. Sydenham Society has made representations. Have we covered that point on table 21.2? Thank you very much. Right, I'm going to move on to policy HE3, and we've got a modification. So we're in the non-designated heritage assets. So this is the balanced judgment that has to be made. So in terms of the modification that the council are proposing in your statement, I think it comes up at 19197 now. Is there anything you need to add to that modification that you've
No change to that modification.
Now, Landsec, who are not here now, I think their representation was that they felt that there was a contradiction between criterion A and B. Does the council feel that there is a contradiction between criterion A and B in policy HE3? Grateful for thoughts.
Our response at paragraph 11.2 of our matter 11 sets out that we suggest modification to part B to omit the references to justification. So that's MO 197.
Thank you. I was just conferring with my colleague. I'm very mindful of the time and people needing to take a lunch break, but I do need to get to the end of policy HE3, and there are a number of other points. So I'll beg your patience for a little bit longer, if that's okay. So that's the modification on that. Just looking at the areas of special local character, I think it was mentioned was mentioned briefly earlier in matter 10, wasn't it? Or could have been earlier in this session. My question on the site, sorry, so the question on the site selection 1113 regarding the local lists. Could the council just briefly summarise in terms of the local lists that you do, what the consultation, whether there's been consultation, has the criteria for selection for the local lists been reviewed? Is it part of the evidence base, or is that sort of ongoing work? So just in terms of the local lists and our question 1113, please.
That is part of ongoing work that sort of falls outside the local plan process. So periodically we look at our local list. We have a number of ways in which nominations come into the council for locally listed buildings. These are sometimes promoted through neighbourhood plans. They're also sometimes promoted by our residents' associations and societies through the course of planning applications, etc. We have got, or we did have, a historic list dating back for several years, which we actually reviewed and updated our local list. We did a review in 2014, and then we updated that again in 2020, which essentially looked at all our historic nominations. As you'll appreciate, there's a continual list of suggestions, very helpful suggestions from our neighbourhood groups and amenity society. So we look at that on a periodic basis, essentially. I don't know if the inspectors are also asking about the areas of special local character, but the areas of special local character were defined in a kind of policy or a kind of non-designated heritage designation, which was a continuation in our previous local plan. These were sites, again, which have been put forward by amenity societies, neighbourhood groups, neighbourhood forums, to really identify areas which have a strong, significant character, which may or may not be future conservation areas, but nevertheless they deserve recognition within the borough. I can hand over to Joanna to provide some details on the work that we're carrying out now, but I think it's fair to say in kind of previous local plans or the previous adopted local plan, it wasn't too clear what those areas were in terms of the criteria of their selection, but also there was no statements of significance associated with the areas of special local character. We now have a programme of proactive conservation work, which we are currently embarking on, and as part of that, we're looking at the historic areas of special local character, and we are preparing statements of significance, which will then go to public consultation on. This should aid and guide not only the public, but also developers in terms of what the particular characteristics of those areas are and why they're important. In parallel to the first consultation, we're also going out to consult on the criteria, a review of the criteria for selecting those areas of special local character. Joanna, I don't know if there's anything you want to add.
Just to add that the selection criteria for the local list have been in place for a long while, and at some point in the future in our proactive conservation work, we will look at reviewing those again. But we're working with the existing ones at the moment.
Thank you. Sydenham Society, your Toblerone went up and it went down again. Has the point moved on, or is
I
there
didn't
something
want
you?
to interrupt the flow. Thank you, Mum. Just wanted to make a point of information that there's one area of special local character that was put forward by the council in March 20, which is Longton Avenue and Lorry Park. And we noted that in our email submission back in April. We think it's probably just an admin error that's not been included this time. So we wanted to draw your attention to that.
So would the council like to respond, please?
Yes, the streets you mentioned are actually included in the Sydenham Hill area of special local character. So they're part of another one rather than being areas themselves.
Mr. Hall.
It is included in my representation, so I just want to make that point. I just want to confirm that Bellingham is going to be added. The Bellingham estate is not the whole of that geographical area, and I think it's included in this local plan and designated as an area of special local character. So what we need, or what I couldn't see, it may be there now because there's been extensive reiterations of this plan, but is there a more detailed map of the boundary that will cover? Now, if I remember rightly, it was only south of Southend Lane, et cetera, et cetera. It just, we have to be precise if it's going to be included. That was my point.
Okay, Ms. Eccleston.
This is part of the work that we're doing at the moment on reviewing all of the areas of special local character and their boundaries. So we've started off on a group over to the west of the borough, and then the next phase is working on ones around Lewisham town centre and south. So we will be looking at the whole of the Bellingham estate and identifying where the boundary line is drawn when we look at its significance.
Thank you, Mr. Hall. Thank you. Now I've got on the list Sydenham Hill residents. Was there a point that you'd like to make at this point?
Yes, please. David Symes has just referred back to the previous local plan, and our concern arose and remains that the previous plan had concurred with the Natural England and GLA designation of Sydenham Ridge as an area of special character, particularly it was the Lewisham Core Policy 17 called Protected Vistas, the London Panorama and Local Views, Landmarks and Panoramas. And it had been so designated due to its unique contribution to London. Therefore, the change from area of special character to area of special local character appeared to us to be, more than just a little significance. It appeared to be an absolute policy decision to move the ridge out of that protection and to give it admittedly local significance, but ignoring its contribution to London. This was not enhanced by the characterization study previously mentioned, which was recognised within its own document not to have sufficient information about our area. Either way, the land remains. Whatever you want to call it, the land and its contribution is there. It appears to us that the ASLC offers far weaker protections, and that we haven't actually had that designation removal justified. In the original local plan appendix 2 paragraph 6.8, it said it would simplify the system if the designation were changed from ASC to ASLC, and that didn't seem sufficient to us. We also raised it, as did the Neighbourhood Forum and Sydenham Society, in various other consultation fora, such as the community groups, and the question was frequently just not picked up. More recently, the email I referred to earlier about the views did say, well, it gives you the same protections, but we remain to be convinced of that. Thank you.
Thank you for that. Would the council like to give a response to that point?
Yeah, I mean, maybe if I start, I mean, with all due respect, I do think we have addressed this in the past many times. Joanna has certainly responded to emails many times on this matter. You know, we are looking to have a consistent policy around areas of special local character, and we feel it's appropriate to have this, to have Sydenham Hill Ridge within that collective. My understanding is that the designation, which I think stemmed from a London GLC designation, no longer exists in any kind of higher policy terminology, which is why we were considering, well, how do we recognize this area with an actual terminology that is consistent with our local policy now that there is no higher policy to hang that off of. And this seems to be a kind of pragmatic approach, really. I'll hand over to Joanna in terms of the detail.
Yes, it used to be seen as a strategic view, and it was dropped when the LVMF was produced, so it wasn't included in the LVMF. So it's been identified that it still, even though it's not recognised but by GLA as having strategic importance through that policy, we recognise that it does have local importance, and through identifying it as an area of special local character, we are doing this work on producing statements of significance, and we've included in our draft of that the importance of views from it, both to the south and to the north. So we're picking up all of those elements. We don't have a policy on areas of special character separately. So the way that we're considering all of these local sites or places is under areas of special local character.
Right, thank you for that. Just moving to sort of the collection of modifications. I'm going to offer a comment on the two non-designated heritage assets that the council refer to, potentially equivalent of significance to scheduled ancient monuments. I think my comment was we need certainty either way, whether that needs to be in the plan or not. Sort of something that's potential is perhaps not as clear. So that's one point, and then there's just some modifications, and that takes us to the end of the list.
So your question relating to 11.16. So our response to that, we confirm that there are two non-designated heritage assets of archaeological interest, and your question is, should they be included? Should they be explicitly referred to in the local plan? And we've said yes, that would be helpful, and we've said that can be achieved through an appropriate modification. Have we got that modification? We will. I don't think we've got that modification on this schedule. So the text that I wrote in my response would be the description of those, and that could form the basis of a modification in the supporting paragraphs to that policy, I would suggest. but we could look at that and include it in the modifications.
Yes, please. I think we need to know whether it's in or not. Some certainty on that would be helpful. If that could feature in the modifications package. And in terms of the other modifications that we've got here, I think we've got 25, 26 and 27. Is there anything more that we need to say about those?
I think there's a modification to 198 paragraph 6.36, which is just updating the fact that Lewisham's APAs were reviewed and updated in 2023 by Historic England in line with London Plan paragraph 7.1.10. The revised APs are available on the council's website. And then in terms of the figures 6.1 and 6.2, I think there is just one or two minor amendments that need to be factual amendments that need to be made to those figures to make sure that they are reflective of the designated and non-designated assets.
Okay, I think we've reached the end of the agenda. Has everybody had sufficient opportunity to say what they needed to say in the session? We obviously have representations and statements. Thank you very much for all your time. We've had two back-to-back sessions this morning, which has been quite detailed. So we need to take a break now. I'd like to take an hour's break, but I'm looking at my colleague in terms of timing. Ms. Malloy.
Yeah, just thinking about this afternoon's session, I think the housing policies discussion, there are only two policies, and I don't have too many points on those. I don't think that would take too long. So it's mainly picking up the other matter 5 things that we didn't cover, and in particular gypsies and travellers. So I'm conscious your Casey is coming along to that this afternoon. I mean, what we could compromise and say 2:20, 2:30. Would that? I'm conscious the council have been working hard in today's session, so it's just making sure everyone gets a long enough break. But I'm happy to take views on that.
Yeah, we'd be happy to come back at 2:20 or 2:30. Either way, it's fine with us.
2:20. Yep. Thank you.
Thank you very much, everyone. We're adjourned until 2:20. Thank you.
Good afternoon. Welcome back, everybody. It's 2:20 and it's time for me to open the hearing session on matter 9, which will be followed up by a mop-up session, for want of a better word, on the other housing requirements matter 5, and in particular including gypsies and travellers from last week. For those of you who haven't met us, I'm Caroline Malloy, and this is my colleague, Dr. Rachel Bust, and we have been appointed jointly to hold the examination of the Lewisham local plan. Can everyone hear me okay at the back there? Can everyone make sure that their mobile phones, etc., are switched off or on silent while the hearing is in session? Just to ensure as well that the microphones are muted if you're not actually speaking. I think the live streaming is struggling to pick up voices where 2 microphones are on at the same time. So just to be aware of that. Just a reminder that the sessions are being live streamed by the council, just to double check nobody has any objections to that. No other participants here. And just a reminder also to speak quite closely to the microphone so that everybody can be heard. Are there any additional housekeeping matters for this afternoon that we haven't covered already?
Just to say that there are no planned tests of the fire alarm. So if the fire alarm does sound, it is a genuine fire alarm. The fire escapes are clearly marked. And the rendezvous point is on the Broadway next to Costa Coffee. Toilet facilities are outdoor to the left, clearly signed.
Okay, thank you. I was trying to clarify if we have an additional participant, or is this a colleague of the council, I'm assuming?
This is an officer, council officer who's been here before, but yeah, I'm not sure if we need to do introductions or.
It might be useful to do introductions for the live streaming. I think what I will dispense with though is the aspect about the form of the hearing discussion today, because we don't actually have any other participants. If there aren't any other procedural matters, if I can ask the council to introduce themselves. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. I'm Andrew Fraser-Urquhart, King's Counsel, here representing Lewisham Council.
I'm David Simon, the head of strategic planning at Lewisham.
Angela Stewart, Principal Policy Officer at Lewisham.
Christopher Fraser, I'm a Policy Officer at Lewisham Council.
Okay, thank you very much. Just in terms of the running order for today, I had, as I alluded to this morning, I don't have too many questions in relation to the 2 housing policies. So I was hoping to kind of get those out of the way, and then we can move on to the sort of additional matters in relation to matter 5 and other housing provision. If there aren't any particular time constraints today, and I'm looking at the KC, is that acceptable to you? You don't have to dash off. Okay, thank you. Well, without further ado, if we can start at the top of the agenda, and policy HO2, optimising the use of small housing sites. The small sites allowance, as discussed last week, came from the London Plan target. And I just wanted to pick up on something you mentioned last week in saying that it had been a challenging target to meet, or will be a challenging target to meet. So I think my point initially is, would that target be realistically delivered? For example, in comparison to past delivery on smaller sites, or is there going to have to be a bit of a step change?
I think if I start and then I'll pass over to my colleague Angela, who's done some prep work for this, which is helpful. I think we recognise that the importance of small sites and the contribution that they will make in the longer term. And I think the 379, as you'll hear, is based on some evidence of past performance. I think it's fair to say, and you'll hear from the evidence in terms of monitoring, that the small sites are reflective of the overall performance or dip in performance that the council has had over recent years. Although, again, once Angela provides the figures, you will see that those are rising quite significantly. So we are confident that we can hit that 379 units per year. I think also we've put in place steps to bolster our performance. We've adopted our small sites SPD, which provides clarity and guidance to developers, as well as encouragement to bring forward small sites. And then I think I mentioned before that the council has a programme of identifying small sites in council land ownership, and is currently going through a process of identifying those, and then looking at a number of options for delivery on those sites, including direct delivery by the council, but also the potential to dispose of some assets for self-builders, community builders, etc., as well as small developers as well. So that is a programme that we are currently embarking on. And then furthermore, we also received some funding from the PropTech Fund, which is working with the consultant RCK to create an AI modelling tool which identifies small sites in private ownership, with a view of identifying opportunities within the borough that might come forward in the future. I'll hand over to Angela to give some past performance data.
I think it's probably worthwhile pointing out that the target that is in the London plan, that was actually derived from our own data that we gave to them. So way back in 2017, we had looked at our past performance, and we found that we had 4,129 units over between 2006 and 2015 at that time. So that equates, divided by the 10 years, that equates to 413 units per annum. So at that time, we were experienced quite a sort of property boom in the area. So that did reflect what was happening on the ground at the time. The inspectors, through the London Plan examination, actually revised our targets down, revised everybody's down across the whole of London. I guess because the methodology that the inspectors, that the GLA had promoted, they didn't believe to be 100% deliverable. So that's why we ended up with our figures of 379. And I do believe that those are deliverable. They are aspirational, but as you say, we've got new projects coming forward that will help implement that. More recently, I have looked at our monitoring that we do through our annual monitoring report. That doesn't actually monitor in terms of the 0.25 hectares. What we look at in terms of small sites within that document is sites which are 10 units or less. But nevertheless, for the very small units that are coming forward between 2013 and 2023, so for the last 10 years, that has provided 2,158 units. So overall, it sort of fluctuates throughout the 10 years, with a minimum of 149 units, a maximum of 317. But once again, to stress that that is just for sites with less than 10 units. I can go away and do the additional work to find out the 0.25 hectare and provide that to you as part of one of the questions that the actions that had been raised the other day.
Yes, in relation to the site size threshold for affordable housing, we'd asked you to compile some evidence in terms of the proportion of development that has come forward on small sites and is likely to through the housing trajectory. So hopefully that would pick up that point.
Yeah. And also in terms of just for the small sites windfall element, that would generate 6,064 units on those small sites in the remaining 16 years that we've got left.
As the inspectors point out, we can provide further clarification. I think the confusion between the third and the 19-20% is the definition of a small site. So in the MPPF, a small site is anything under 1 hectare, whereas the London plan, it's quite clear that a small site is under 0.25 hectares. But we can set that clearly out within a note.
That's really helpful. Thank you for that. And so that should be coming through in the form of a note in relation to the previous question anyway. Just in terms of question 9.1, should the small sites target set out paragraph 7.14 of the plan be included in policy H2 rather than the supporting text? We'll just hear the council's viewpoint on that, please.
Yes, I think we think it would be beneficial to include it within the policy, but also within the text paragraph 7.14, and we have recommended an amendment MO 201, which relates to that.
Thank you for that. Moving on to the approach towards housing conversions at HO2 part or criterion E. I've just asked a question there. Where has the site size threshold of 130 metres squared come from? And I'm conscious that there is a modification in relation to this.
Yeah, the council is suggesting a modification, just to be clear, that the 130 square metres derives from a previous policy position. Clearly, there's been quite a lot of water under the bridge in terms of family size units, etc. So we are recommending a modification MO 202, which removes that part A, small criteria A, the gross internal floor space of the original dwelling is 130 square metres or greater.
That's fine, thank you. I don't think I need to ask the last question in terms of whether it's the policy is justified, effective and consistent with national policy in the London plan. I think I know what the council's answer will be to that.
Yes.
Just in terms of modifications, have we picked up all of the modifications on that policy? I'm just, if you can just guide me on that.
Yes, happy to do so. So modification 35 to paragraph 720 of HO 02 is some correction of grammar and typos. Modification 200, again, I think we picked it up, including a small site target within policy HO2. I think modification 201 is confirmation of that. We have modification, oh, no, that's moving on to HO3. Stop there.
Okay, thank you. Moving on now to policy HO4, housing estate maintenance, renewal and regeneration. Is the approach to the policy set out in policy H4 appropriate and justified by the evidence?
Yes, the council considers that the policy approach is appropriate and justified. We would reference that policy HO04 is informed by Better Homes for Local People, the Mayor's Good Practice Guide to Estate Regeneration, published in February 2018. The policy itself emphasises that development proposals involving estate renewal and regeneration must be carried out in consultation with the existing residents and local community. This is strongly advocated in the Mayor's practice guide. Furthermore, in terms of estate management, I think the response to the MIQ talks about our partners Lewisham Homes and transferring the Lewisham Homes to the council, which manage 19,000 homes within the borough. We think the policy is robust, necessary to provide the detail on estate regeneration and renewal, and also to link back to the London plan and relevant guidance.
Okay, thank you. And I've posed a question there, 9.6. Is it appropriate to require compliance with a decent home standard in the policy? Right here on B.C. And I am conscious that there was consultation on as to whether to extend the decent home standard to the private rented sector, and I don't think that's been resolved yet. So it is still a relevant standard, obviously, in terms of the public sector. I was just posed a question in terms of whether that would be applicable if there was a sort of private sector redevelopment, for example, or it may be a public-private partnership. How that decent home standard would fit in if it wasn't purely a social rented housing or social housing.
I think it's a fair point. Obviously, that consultation hasn't resulted in a conclusion yet. In terms of a public-private partnership, I think the council does, when it goes into a kind of that type of arrangement, does specify decent home standards. But I think we could take this away and look at some minor modifications just to make clear that at present this is related to a public estate and regeneration, and maybe there's some supporting text around the consultation which is ongoing that we can add as well.
I'm conscious that the matter may be concluded in the planned period, so it's just how that's addressed if the government decide to extend that. So it's kind of covering both bases, isn't it? So I think potentially some wording and to the supporting text, something like that.
Yes, we can take that away. Yeah.
And just checking for modifications. I'm not aware of any modifications.
No, there's none for this policy.
Just moving on now to policy HO6, supported and specialist accommodation. What is the evidence in relation to the need for supported and specialist accommodation?
Pass over to Angela for this one.
Chapter 6 of the SHMA goes into quite a bit of detail. It actually looks at the needs, additional needs for housing for people, and it looks at 4 different strands. So in terms of age, health, life, and also cultural. And so it breaks down each one of these different types of housing that is required, and sets out how much we have in our borough. It also looks at the need for mainstream housing, not just specialist housing. So how you would also be able to adapt housing in the borough as well. In terms of age, it looks at just general old age, but it also looked at dementia need as well. It looks at health. It provides some detail about disabilities in the borough and how many people are affected by disabilities. It also looked at learning disabilities and mental health. And it provides detail about wheelchair accessible housing as well. And then the 3 other remaining parts that it goes into about armed forces, of which there's very minimal demand in our borough for that, or need. It looked at cultural factors, and it found that people in the BAME community actually generate a demand for family-sized housing. A lot of BAME families like to live in extended groups with the grandparents within the same household, and that puts extra pressure on our family housing in the borough, and that's one of the reasons why we were keen to have our policy in H02, which retains family-sized housing. And then also it mentions about self-build, and within that it generates, it says that there is a small demand for self-build, which we'll come on to later on anyway, but there is a mismatch between what people actually want and what can be provided in the borough, just because of the nature of the development that takes place here. It also looks at student housing. We covered that the other day. So throughout all of these different levels of need, it comes out with only 2 or 3 different recommendations. The first one is about providing 98, I believe, 98 C3 units per year for elderly accommodation, and 23 C2, so that's the more supported accommodation. It also recommended that we include a policy which has 10% wheelchair accessible housing, in line with M4(3) of the building regulations.
I'm just thinking about the crossover there with policy HO5 in terms of the identified need. So obviously You mentioned dementia there, which is connected to, not always, but it can be associated with older people. Is that a separate identified need to the need for accommodation for older people? Just wanted to clarify.
No, sorry, I should have clarified that. That is within the elderly accommodation need.
Just thinking about the effectiveness of the policy. I know we had this discussion the other day in relation to accommodation for older people. And I think the feeling was that the market would provide that accommodation. Does the council consider there would be a similar situation in relation to supported and specialist accommodation? Will it be market led?
Yes, I believe so. We do have some monitoring data. I'll have to go away and look at it in more depth. But over the last few years, we have had only small amounts of specialist accommodation coming forward, being built in the borough.
Because it's kind of more of a niche type of accommodation, isn't it? In many ways. So the need you mentioned there in relation to 98 C3 units and 20 C2 units. How can the council be confident that those would be delivered through policy H06? Because there isn't actually a specific target within the policy.
We can certainly reflect the requirements that are outlined within the SHMA in terms of the identified needs. I'm looking at Angela to clarify exactly what those are, but we could certainly put that within the policy if that would make it clearer as a target.
I guess the SHMA doesn't actually provide specific recommendations on the need level for the individual types of housing, with the exception of the elderly accommodation, which that does provide the target. The only other target was relating to the wheelchair accessible target.
I'm just thinking, would there be a benefit of including the target in the policy? Because the policy isn't requiring developers to provide a certain amount on sites coming forward. But it may help to include the target within there.
Yes, we can do that. Yep.
And in relation to part AB and providing a mix of tenures, including affordable housing, I think my question on that is whether that has been viability tested in relation specifically to supported and specialist accommodation.
If I may, I wonder if we can take that away and pick that up at the viability session and provide some clarity there.
Thank you. I think that concludes my questions on policy H06, unless there was anything else wanted to draw to my attention. Okay, so moving on to policy H09 and self-build and custom build housing. Could the council just explain what the evidence is in terms of the need for self-build and custom build housing in the borough?
Yes, we do have a self-build register that has been in place since 2017. It is looked at annually and reported in our annual monitoring report. As at 30th of October 23, which is the latest published data that we have, we had 385 people on the register. And the issue with that is these people can actually go on multiple registers. So in terms of looking at the actual demand for our borough, I guess the 385 is an over-exaggeration of the need. And we are considering looking into a local connections test, implementing that sometime in the future to be able to manage that need in the register more accurately. In terms of the number of units that have been consented, it is obviously much lower than that. So we have had 77 units consented since 2015-16. 36 of those are from one particular site in Church Grove, which has actually just been completed. The council worked with an organisation called RUS to develop out these 36 units, and that has been deemed as a success. So even though at the moment we are not meeting the need on our, I guess, inflated register, but we are actively seeking to implement projects.
And has the council done any further work in trying to narrow down the need to the borough and kind of to wheedle out, if you like, the need on the register to just local need?
That's what we are intending to do, hopefully this autumn.
If I may, I think the council again is supportive of self-build. It's just the practicalities, particularly in a London borough like Lewisham, where land value is incredibly high. The two self-builds or significant self-build sites that are mentioned within the response to the MIQ were essentially gifted to those organisations. Now, the council is not in the financial position to do that. We have got, and I did mention, a programme looking at small sites, and we have been actively targeting some of those small sites to self-builders and community land trusts to see if they would be interested in potentially, if we dispose of some sites, whether they could pick those up. Again, I won't go into kind of details, but there are kind of financial constraints around the council about best value for public land that we have as well. So it is quite a challenge for local authorities, particularly London boroughs, to try to meet the needs. And I think, as Angela says, we are thinking about how we best look at the register, because essentially you can just for free at the moment register with Lewisham on the self-build register. There might have to be a small fee to try to make sure that we have got people who are genuinely interested in the self-build approach and genuinely want to participate in that, as opposed to, you know, signing up everywhere in London.
Had the council considered setting a specific requirement, you know, it's on development sites, developers had to provide a certain percentage to be self-built or custom built?
We have not, no. I think, again, given the density and scale that we are looking at in terms of meeting our housing targets, I think it would be quite a challenge for our development partners for us to carve off particular areas of their site. I think that would require quite careful consideration of the development viability as well, which undoubtedly would be impacted.
And again, there's a requirement for affordable housing. How does that sit with, you know, potentially smaller sites, and, you know, has that been assessed in the viability study as well, in terms of whether it would be viable to deliver affordable housing on self-build sites? Or is that something you want to come back to in terms of the viability?
If I may, yes. Yep.
Okay, I had no further points in relation to that policy, or indeed matter 5. So unless the council has any particular points, I think I've covered everything. So moving on to policy H10 and gypsy and traveller accommodation. Can the council just start by setting out briefly the evidence in terms of the need for additional gypsy and traveller accommodation provision first of all? Thank you.
Yeah, so the council submitted the evidence base which underpins the need. That is the Gypsy and Traveller Accommodation Assessment, GTA, which was published in June 2015 and updated in 2016. This established the need for 6 pitches in the borough up to 2031.
Okay, thank you. I mean, given that the study is dated August 2016, that the lifetime of the plan runs to 2040, did the council consider updating that evidence at all?
If I may, just in terms of the background to the Gypsy and Travellers and the site allocation that we have. So when we went through the process of adopting our local plan and core strategy back in 2013, we did not have a Gypsy and Traveller site. And I think the council committed at that point to undertake a single issues local plan on Gypsy and Travellers, which it did progress. And there has been numerous consultation on the preparation of that document, from agreeing a criteria to assess sites, to then narrowing down the site selection process to a short list or a long list of 7, and then shortlisting that down to 2, and then moving forward on the basis of a Regulation 18 document. The Poole Court site allocation was identified by Mayor and Cabinet and full council as the preferred site location to accommodate our Gypsy and Travellers' needs. I give this background because I want to explain to the inspectors the lengthy process that this has gone through, and obviously can appreciate the challenges associated with trying to accommodate the kind of type of need and the perceptions around that within the community. At a point when we were preparing the plan, effectively the plan preparation, the local plan preparation, had essentially caught up with the single issues local plan. We had effectively selected our preferred site allocation to meet our needs, and it was deemed reasonable at that time to absorb that within the main body of the local plan as we were preparing that. The LDS that we have revised incorporated those changes and announced those changes in an appropriate way. As I've said before, there has been some significant delays to the local plan process after that, in terms of COVID and general elections, etc., which means there has been, a significant delay. Nevertheless, we felt it was prudent, given the position that we were at the moment, to proceed on the basis of we have identified needs, albeit only to 2031. We have a site that has been selected. Let's move forward with that. I would also like to say that the council is fundamentally committed to delivering the pitches, the 6 pitches at the Poole Court site. Submitted a planning application, which is due to be determined on the site. Half the site is in council ownership, half the site is in Network Rail ownership. We have agreed a sale value for that site. We have committed sums to buy the site and to deliver the 6 pitches. I think we recognise and acknowledge that the evidence base for this needs to be reviewed. What I would say is that the GLA are currently reviewing at a London-wide level the need for Gypsy and Travellers following the changes in definition and the guidance that was published after the submission of this plan. So the submission of the plan was in November. The guidance was changed in December of the same year, 2023. So we find ourselves in a position where we have a plan which is committed to meeting our provision up to 2031. We have a site allocated, we have the funds to deliver that, And then we also have evidence base, which is emerging, which we're working with the GLA on at the moment, to look at needs with that wider and broader definition. We're anticipating that evidence base to be published in the next 12 months, 12 to 18 months. So the council, in terms of its position, thinks it's prudent, given the importance of getting a local plan adopted, that we proceed on that basis and then look at options for reviewing this particular policy in light of that emerging policy, emerging evidence base, sorry.
We'll come on to the issue of the revised definition in a moment, but just in a very similar way to looking at general housing need, paragraph 10 of the PPTS asks local planning authorities to set out and identify and update annually a supply of specific deliverable sites to provide 5 years worth of sites against locally set targets. And then beyond that, identify specific developable sites or broad locations for years 6 to 10, and where possible 11 to 15 years. Now, I think part of the issue is obviously the need is only identified to 2031. So that would only, and I appreciate that you've allocated the Poole Court site that would meet the need identified in the study to 2031. But it raises a question really of whether the approach would meet the requirements of PPTS beyond that 5-year supply period in terms of identifying a supply specific deliverable sites or broad locations beyond that time, bearing in mind that there could be additional need beyond that 2031 period. And 2031 would only take us to 7 years if we adopt 2024, or 6 years if you adopt 2025. So I think those are the concerns in my mind.
Well, I mean, that's a fair summary of the position. And the question really is what can be done? And at the moment, the first thing is identifying need, which is a twofold process. There's first of all the identification of need beyond 2031, and then the identification of any additional need arising from the change in definition. And looking at the position in a sensible, pragmatic way, that is precisely the exercise that the GLA, obviously with our assistance, but primarily the GLA, is embarked upon. And I mean, frankly, there isn't a great deal more one can do other than to await the completion of that work. So that then leads on to the second question is, in general terms, what approach should you adopt to this local plan policy? This local plan policy identifies out, as you said, the 7-year period, sites which fully deal with the need that's identified thus far. And in a sense, the question that you've got to ask yourselves is it sensible and appropriate to take this policy out or delay the whole local plan? Or do you simply say that in this particular area of provision for need, which is always an incredibly difficult and sensitive one, and it's one where every council I've ever assisted on a local plan process has found one of the most difficult things to satisfy the policy tests, and they often don't, and they often have to look to a degree of pragmatism in the preparation of the local plan process. And ultimately, that's where we are, isn't it?
Just playing devil's advocate, would the council suggest that say the council couldn't meet the 15-year supply of housing for general housing, would the council be suggesting that I take a similar approach in relation to general housing? Because that the requirement the requirement set out in paragraph 10 of PPTS is very similar to general housing, the general housing requirement. And I don't really see a situation where the council would ask me to take such a pragmatic approach in relation to general housing. So why should I take a different approach in relation to gypsy and traveller accommodation?
I think the answer has to lie in the particular combination of circumstances which you find yourself in now, which is the fact that there has been a definition change which potentially affects the need position, the fact that there is ongoing study work to deal with this, and because I think it is fair to acknowledge the particular sensitivity and difficulty of finding, particularly in an inner London urban area, of finding appropriate sites. You know, you've seen the council, as David said, pressing forward with a degree of vigour on the site that it does have, actually bring it forward and make it happen. But it is a peculiarly difficult area, this, where you have to do the best that you can, and the council is doing just that, and it's pushing forward. There is a process in place for an updating of the need, but that's simply where the position is, and there's no getting away from that.
I'd just like to park that particular point. We can return to it in terms of how we move forward. But just looking at part 2 of the question, if you like, in terms of the effect of the revised definition and the degree to which that affects the evidence. Now, I obviously have seen your written statement, which suggests that be picked up as part of a more general review. Data the evidence base. I did just want to clarify. Now, I have come across this in relation to other local plan examinations where I have posed the same question. And the particular councils in question went back to the author of the gypsy and traveller accommodation assessment, which in this case is the same author. And it was pointed out that in terms of the revised definition, those who hadn't met the definition, i.e. had ceased to travel, were actually assessed. They were actually surveyed and assessed, and I'm going to need to find the reference for that. Just bear with me. So you may wish to take a moment to turn to the council's gypsy and traveller accommodation assessment. I'll just let you bring that up, and we're looking at page 9. Actually, apologies, it's page 6.
Do you have a document reference number for that, please?
LC2, I believe. If you go to page 6, paragraph 3.8, sort of the second part of paragraph 3.8, whilst the needs of those households that do not meet the new definition do not need to be included in the GTAA, they will be assessed to provide the council with components of need to consider it as part of the SHMA. And that includes those households that have ceased to travel temporarily under the new definition. So I think my question is the council in their response stated it hadn't been assessed. But I know in terms of the response I've had from ORS on in other areas, that they did actually assess the need, but it wasn't included in the actual target. And in this case, the study states that two households did not meet the new definition, as they were not able to demonstrate that they travel away from their usual place of residence for purpose of work, or they have ceased to travel temporarily due to children in education, ill health, or old age. So I think my question to the council, you may wish to clarify this with ORS, is, actually has that need been assessed in terms of those who have ceased to travel? My reading of it is that it has, and that need would be two additional households, but that obviously is not included in the 6 because it didn't meet the definition. They didn't meet the definition at the time. So I just wanted to flag that up because in terms of, the meeting the revised definition, it may be that evidence is already there. So I'm going to leave that with you. And you may want to take some time. I think we've got enough time if you just want to read the document and see what you think about that. But if it is potentially a maximum of 2 households who do not meet the definition or did not meet the definition at that time, then that could be that additional need to meet the revised definition. So did the council just want a few minutes? We've got time to look at that. If you wanted to look at the assessment to see if that's your understanding of it, and maybe just to confirm that we ask the consultants to clarify that. And there's a table below paragraph 5.2 which states that there's meets the definition of B6 and does not meet the definition 2. So I just wondered whether that work had been done up to 2031 anyway. But that's something you may wish to clarify with the consultants.
Yes, it would appear to be the case from reading this, but it would be useful for the council to check with the consultants that prepared this.
I only flagged it because it's come up in other examinations, and that's been the response to those examinations. Clearly, this is a separate study, so it may be that they've taken a different stance. But my reading of that would be certainly there would be 2 households who didn't meet the definition. Whether that's one and the same with households who've ceased to travel in the context of a revised definition, I think that's something you may wish to seek clarity on with the consultants.
Yes, we'll do that.
So if that could be recorded as an action point, And I think as a further action point, depending on the response of the consultants on that, it might be useful just to have the council's view on where that leaves the council, where, you know, the council's revised position, if that doesn't, if that those two households are the additional households that would meet the revised definition. So, you know, maybe it's a short commentary on the consultant's response to that. And for sake of argument, assuming that I'm correct on that, in terms of potentially meeting the need for those two additional households, would Poor Court potentially meet that need? Is there the possibility of it meeting a need beyond six pitches?
It's very unlikely. I think if my memory serves me right, there could potentially be 7 pitches. But at the moment, I think the application is for 6. It would not be able to meet the 8 if that is the requirement and definition. I mean, there's nothing in terms of HO10, the kind of policy there's nothing to stop, you know, a private interest sort of creating a gypsy and traveller site as a, you know, as a commercial approach to meet that need in the same way as conventional residential. But at the moment, the council hasn't identified a site to meet any additional need.
Okay, so in terms of meeting any additional need arising from the definition, there would be the need to look at potentially additional sites, or that need being met through policy H10.
I mean, as always in these cases, the existence of the criteria-based policy, as well as allocated sites, is always something you have to bear in mind with gypsy and traveller accommodation in particular.
And just in terms of the London study, what's the time frame for that? When's it expected to be completed?
We have been feeding into the study. My understanding is that it is likely to be 12 to 18 months, which I think we've outlined in the MIQ. So that is looking at a London-wide approach to the needs with the new definition, and then it will be looking at disaggregating that across the boroughs, essentially in the same way as conventional housing.
Okay, thank you. And within the study, how were the needs of unknown households and transit provision considered?
I think we've responded to that in our response to MIQ 5.41. In respect of unknown households, the authors of the Lewisham Gypsy and Traveller Accommodation Assessment Update stated that it would be inappropriate when producing a robust assessment of need to make any firm assumptions about whether or not households that did not complete an interview would meet the planning policy for sites 2015 definition. It goes on to say that the Lewisham Gypsy and Traveller Accommodation Assessment Update LC2 refers to data collected from over 1,250 household interviews completed by Opinion Research Service since the planning policy for Traveller Site 2015 definition. Approximately 10% of households met the planning policy for Traveller Site 2015 definition, and in some cases, particularly in London boroughs, 100% of households did not meet the planning policy for Travellers Sites 2015 definition. It was concluded that councils at their own discretion will need to carefully consider how to address the needs associated with unknown travellers in local plan policies, as it's unlikely that all the need will need to be addressed through the provision of gypsy and traveller pitches.
What about in terms of transit provision?
I think the response goes on 5.41.4. The Lewisham Gypsy and Traveller Accommodation Assessment Update LC2 acknowledges that the changes to the planning policy for traveller sites definition made in 2015 could result in increased levels of travelling. However, it was not recommended that there was a need for the council to consider any transit provision through the new local plan at the time of publication of the Lewisham Gypsy and Traveller Accommodation Update LC2. This has been supported through data recorded by the council showing transit sites in the borough have remained low throughout the production of the new Lewisham local plan, with 9 transit sites identified between 2018 and 2021.
And in terms of the response rate to the Lewisham assessment, it was quite low, wasn't it? It only involved 11, only actually 11 interviews were carried out as part of that assessment, as I understand.
Yes, that's factually accurate.
I mean, is that a statistically robust basis for assessing need?
I mean, there's always an element of uncertainty, particularly in this kind of type of assessment, and it's notoriously difficult to do. I mean, as you know, ORS are probably the leading organisation involved in doing this work, who have built links of trust with the traveller community to enable them to do the best that can be done, and that is simply the evidence that's available. And it's the best one has to work with.
I mean, what were the issues in terms of, you know, when the study was undertaken, in terms of trying to reach the Gypsy and Traveller community? You know, why were there only 11 interviews undertaken? What were the challenges?
I can't speak to the evidence because I wasn't here at the council when it was undertaken. But what I can do is speak to the consultation process that we went through with the single issues local plan, and I think it's fair to say that despite an extensive outreach program of consultation in spite connecting in with local gypsy and traveller organisations. There is a genuine mistrust between the gypsy and travellers community and the council, which is incredibly difficult to overcome. With the consultation that was held out on numerous occasions on the pool court site, as I said, we did reach out. We asked and met with local Gypsy and Traveller Association and tried to facilitate discussions with them, and yet the consultation response in that regard was still relatively low.
Can I just say that through both exercises and the consultations, we did liaise with the Gypsy and Traveller Liaison Officer who works in this. I think they work across Lewisham and Southwark. So we were targeting discussions with that group and that in particular that person.
Mr. Fraser, I don't wish to distract you from your phone, but in terms of the in terms of coming back to this point about the how we move forward, what's the council's suggestion in terms of the fact that the evidence base is out of date? It may or may not pick up the revised definition, but even if it did, there wouldn't be the capacity on the allocated site to to meet any additional need arising from the revised definition. So how does the council suggest to us that we take the matter forward in the plan?
We suggest the following. First, on the state of the evidence base as it is, this is the best pragmatic solution for taking forward a sensible, workable policy in the short term in this local plan. Secondly, there is an update to the evidence base coming forward, as you've heard, which takes account not just of the evolving need, but the amended definition. When that is available, the council will be in a position to review these parts of the local plan on an early basis. And in the interim, reliance can be placed on the criteria-based approach so that if additional sites come forward on the basis of additional need for which we haven't made provision through court, then they can be assessed in that way. It is a sensible and pretty permissive policy, criteria-based policy, and therefore we suggest that given where the evidence is, and given where matters are in terms of things being taken forward at GLA level, that this is the best approach that there is to go forward. I mean, the question must be, what are the alternatives?
You're preempting my next question there. In terms of, in your view, what are the alternatives?
Well, we suggest that there aren't any sensible alternatives to where this policy is. It wouldn't be sensible to have a local plan devoid of any provision for gypsy and traveller accommodation. Probably wouldn't be sound on that basis. But the local plan is desperately needed, And if the option is simply to hold up the whole local plan process whilst this one particular aspect, which may, as we've seen, be for no more than two further needs based on the new definition in the immediate short term in that 7-year period. I mean, it's a choice between that and holding up the whole local plan process whilst the additional provision or additional need is identified by the GLA and additional provision is made. We would say that the sensible thing is to take it forward on this basis, knowing what's coming along the line. I mean, if we were in a position where no further attempt was being made to deal with these issues, well, that would be entirely different. But here, you know, there is a programme of work underway to resolve the issue of establishing need on a more up-to-date basis, both definitionally and in fact. And from that, further provision can be made in the near term. But as the facts stand now, that's where we are.
So I'm guessing the alternative of, you know, providing that additional evidence, up-to-date evidence, and pausing the examination and looking for another site would not be the preferred option of the council.
Absolutely not, because it's not as if anything can be done faster, really, than that which the GLA is doing already. Yeah, I mean, if there was some quick and easy way of doing it, well, that might be something to contemplate, but we would strongly suggest that there isn't any quick and easy way. Certainly one can't move faster than the GLA process, we would respectfully submit, and therefore that isn't a sensible option because the amount of delay that would be involved.
And what stage is that, the London update at the moment? Yeah, I know you mentioned the overall timescale, but in, you know, where's it at currently?
The initial outreach from the GLA regarding this was made in March 2023. I think that was just laying the groundwork for what was coming forward. Our first meeting and initial figures, that was in October 2023. There was then an opportunity for councils to provide comments to the figures and also to the methodology. The councils provided that. Then there was a bit of a delay, and in April 2024, there was another draft paper was released and provided to each council. Again, with an updated figure, with a reviewed methodology. Then we have been told that because it's a draft paper, we're not allowed to publicize it. And within the next 6 to 12 months, I think, is the timeline. So that would take it at a 18-month, 2-year timeline, I think, from start to finish of the process.